So go for it.
So for those who aren't aware about paragraph 80, I can't do a show of hands now. It's a piece of national policy that was introduced in 1997. What's going on there? Where's the next slide? Oh, it's a good start, isn't it? Hold on. What's going on there? Bear with. That was that showing up as a blank screen?
Yes, it was. Yeah, yeah. We saw the first slide. Fine. Try it again. Right, we can see.
Right.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, so yeah, for those who don't know, paragraph 80 is a piece of national planning policy that was introduced in 1997 to enable the possibility of building a new isolated house in the countryside. Here's a little timeline of the progression of this policy, but introduced in 1997 as the Governor's Law, and it created the possibility in national policy to build a new isolated house in the countryside, because planning policy generally has wanted to avoid houses in the countryside and focus them on settlement areas. So in 1997, I opened up this possibility, and then there was a very few people knew about this policy then, but you got the occasional large country house in kind of traditional style, typically. Then in 2003, 2004, there was a possibility that this policy was going to get removed, dropped, and then there was loads of the architectural community stood up and said, no, we think this is a really good piece of policy, it should stay. The wording changed, and the introduction of the words contemporary architecture and the first use of the term truly outstanding and the word groundbreaking was introduced in 2004. So it kind of started setting the scene for kind of innovation being something embedded in this policy. And then in 2012, the national planning policy came in, the wording changed again, nuances, but innovation, the word innovation appeared for the first time in 2012. Interestingly, not the term groundbreaking. I'll get on to why there's a difference. And then, so we've kind of dealt with working with this piece of national policy, designing individual isolated homes in the countryside for many years now. It's the focus of all the work we do. We come across lots of different interpretations from planning officers, conservation officers, design officers of how they interpret this policy and how it's evolved over time. I'm going to talk you through some of that with some case studies. And interestingly, the current version of the National Planning Policy Framework has dropped the word innovation altogether. So ironically, I'm here talking about paragraph 18, innovation, and the word innovation is now no longer in the policy. But anyway, we'll go on to why in a little bit. So a little bit of a summary there. Again, 1997, the original version of it, no mention of the word innovation. 2004, groundbreaking. Then that led to a term truly outstanding or innovative. So it became a choice potentially, and then that evolved in the or innovative was dropped in the current version of the policy. So in 2004, when the term groundbreaking was introduced into this piece of policy, it was the spirit of it was to, I guess, be looking at, it used the term contemporary architecture in that the version of the policy as well. So it was opening the possibility up of a new isolated home in the countryside and it being contemporary, it dealing with, architecturally responding to context and landscape more than perhaps the traditional country house might. And it introduced this term groundbreaking. So using these types of houses as a place to test things. Somebody once referred to these types of buildings as Formula One cars, like the Formula One versions of houses. And that's quite a neat analogy in a sense that some things get tried out on houses like this, and then they can work their way into the marketplace later. That's certainly true of our house, and I'll talk about some ways certain technologies have evolved over time. But interestingly, with this term, groundbreaking, it became a little bit of a difficult term to actually prove, because often you'd get a situation, as I say in the right-hand corner there, the LPA might say, well, will it work? You might be proposing something crazy, but will it work? And if your answer was, well, it should do theoretically, they might say, well, how much weight can I give to something you can't prove? But the more likely you are to be able to prove it, it's more likely to have been tried and tested, and therefore it's not groundbreaking. So you get limited weight either way. So it becomes a bit of a circular loop. It was a bit difficult, a bit of a difficult test to prove. But the term groundbreaking is kind of rooted in that thought of being pioneering, never done before, untested, untried. So one of our early houses, this one was on Grand Design's last series, we got planning consent for this actually back in 2011, so prior to the national policy framework. And back then, so this is a long time ago for us having designed it, although it's only just gone out on Grand Designs, it's been worked on for a lot longer than that. This house was in a scheduled ancient monument on a site where a dismissed appeal for a house had happened. So our client came to us having had an appeal for a house on this site dismissed, and the inspector had said there shouldn't be a house on this site because it's an important gap between dwellings on the site. So we had to do something quite special. But so back in the day when we were doing this, the term groundbreaking applied, and you kind of had to throw the kitchen sink at innovation and show that you were doing something very unusual. And so back then when we were designing this house, it wasn't enough to kind of have a piece of truly outstanding architecture that was a unique response to a site. So back then, oh no, not white screen. Oh, here we go. So back then we proposed all sorts of different things to try out. So on this particular house, when we originally got planning consent for it, we were going to try out oh, that slide's not showing up. We were going to try out free radical water treatment. So we found this guy, really interesting, eccentric guy who had developed a small unit that could treat water using free radicals. And we could use that water to then kind of treat it, use for irrigation, potable water, etc. But it'd never been done on a domestic scale before. The cost of doing it was going to be astronomical because it had never been done before, but you kind of had to throw the kitchen sink at it to get to a level where a local authority felt that the scheme was groundbreaking. And actually doing it is a very different thing, and whether it actually worked is another thing. But I use that as an example of one that, once upon a time, that was how we went about doing it. Another thing in that house, we had a driver on board car lift. Now, when we designed the house, you couldn't get one in the UK. There wasn't one legally enabling you to stay in the car whilst going up and down in a lift. You could get out of a car and have a car lift that worked like that, but back in 2011 there wasn't one. There wasn't the legislation that enabled you to sit in the car and go up and down, because it needed to have all the fail safes of a passenger lift. Anyway, by the time we finished it, built it, there was one, and we ended up putting one in. It was an important part of planning for this scheme because we're in a scheduled ancient monument. We wanted to maintain openness of the skyline and views from the Pilgrim's Way over the house and the site without the clutter of outbuildings and wheelie bins and stuff like that. So everything sits down in this basement kind of garage, including wheelie bins, provide level access, everything can sit down there, your mother, everything. That was all part of the package really for this, but it did make things more challenging. So then in 2012, National Planning Policy Framework comes in, the wording changed again. The word groundbreaking is then taken out, but the test is altered to say that a scheme needs to demonstrate itself to be truly outstanding or innovative. And this is really interesting wording because there seems to be the suggestion of a choice. And I've always had a little bit of an issue with this one because if it's a choice, what if you choose to go one direction, or we're going to choose for it to be innovative rather than truly outstanding, forgetting the fact the next test in the policy requires you to demonstrate something reflecting the highest standards in architecture. And I've asked so many people, including QCs, to give me a definition of something that differentiates something that reflects the highest standards in architecture and why that wouldn't inherently be truly outstanding. Not had a proper answer to that one yet. So if I'm correct that you have to pass the high standard architecture test, which you must, and that is truly outstanding, then poor innovative becomes mute. But the challenge I have, and we've had this discussion with many local planning authorities and inspectors over the years, is if you sought to, through a series of different houses, adapt and develop a series of technologies to a point where you get them working really, really well, why wouldn't you carry on using them? And you could be innovating through one project to another. So, for example, when we built my house, my house is an arch-roofed house, for those who don't know it, on Grand Designs many moons ago. We tried out some prototype technologies and used the house as a bit of a test bed for things, with the idea being that I've built a house that it was the first house in England to be finished and the second one to get his Passive House certificate. Helen Seymour Smith beat me to it with her Underhill project to get her certificate. But anyway, one of the first ones in 2009 to be certified Passive House. So it's a really efficient building, and we wanted to try stuff out on it. And we thought we'd learn a lot, and then we could apply that to what we do day to day. So we tried out a prototype PVT panel, where it's PV with a diffuser glass in front. And the intention here was to actually increase the amount of heat on the PV panels, which is something opposite, contrary to what you'd normally try and do, but then with a cooling system, a solar thermal system behind the PV, with the intention of taking that heat away, storing that heat, and then cooling the PV. And then the idea being you get more electricity by cooling the panels, and you get heat, which you can then use for domestic hot water and heating. Trouble with the system we put in originally is they worked really, really well, in the sense they generated loads and loads of heat, but we just didn't have the capacity, anywhere near the capacity, to store the heat to keep the panels cooled down. So the panels cooked, so we got less electricity, and it reduced the lifespan of the systems. So our phase change thermal store that we installed, which was a prototype, this is the one on the screen, is the second prototype, was great in terms of it could store a lot more thermal energy than a normal heat store could, but nowhere near enough. We subsequently, in 2014, we changed that system to a fourth generation PVT, added a second heat store, just so we've adapted things over time. But the next house we did back in 2012, we thought, well, the better way to try and cool the panels will be to we need a bigger heat dump. So we put a slinky system in the garden, a second generation panel without the diffuser glass. So we're more on a kind of 1 thermal to 1 electrical, rather than 4 to 1, which was what our original prototypes were doing. And then using a water to water heat pump, basically just take energy from the panels. So in the summer, the heat gets dumped into the garden, and then in the winter, we draw that heat out and serve the house heat demand. Worked really, really well. Much bigger heat sink. You're effectively getting to charge the ground up again, so it improves the COP on the heat pump. After that, we thought, well, rather than having the slinky in the garden, why not put the slinky system under the house, use the house as a lid of a flask, insulate the inside edge of the strip footings, and create an earth energy bank, an interseasonal heat store. Works really well. We've seen sort of 16 degrees sway in temperature between summer and winter with this technology. It works really, really well, but it's complex and it's expensive to put in. I'll get into how that's relevant later. But it works in certain instances where you've got the right substrate. This technology can work very, very well. This is that house. It's in Biddenden in Kent. It was given consent under paragraph 55, so an earlier version of this policy, but it was on a farmstead, surrounded by listed buildings. So it responded to the hierarchy of buildings on that farmstead, hence its form. This was another project, this paragraph 5580 project, just in the Cotswolds AONB, outside Cheltenham, long distance used Cheltenham Racecourse. This house used the same system as that, with Earth Energy Bank. The leaf-shaped roof was designed to actually extract heat, extract solar energy, much like a leaf, dump that energy under the house. Same thing, we've got 50 odd boreholes under the house, about 1.5 meters deep. And this is the house that we've measured a 16-degree sway in temperature between summer and winter. Works really, really well. After we'd done those 2 houses, we got consent and appeal for the leas at the top of the chalk cliffs. And this house, because it's in chalk and chalk's an insulant, we can't dump the thermal energy into chalk in the same way we can with clay. So the intention here was to dig a deeper borehole and dump the energy deeper down. So by the time we actually got consent appeal for this and actually started building it, we'd learned enough from the other houses to know that what we could do is actually put the slinky system in the strip footings and use the chalk as an insulant to keep the heat in the strip footings and use that as the heat store. But the council asked us to basically do lots of thermal modelling to prove that our altered system would be at least as good as the original system. And that was going to cost lots of thousands of pounds to model properly both ways. So we said, oh, sorry, we'll just do it the way we said. And so the process there, the way they went about it, stopped us being able to carry on innovating because they effectively held the scheme in aspic from where we got planning consent. So subsequently, we actually have worked with inspectors on a few schemes to write planning conditions that enable the furthering of innovation between getting a consent and actually building it, rather than holding things in aspic. It wouldn't make much sense, really. This is that house. Not quite sure why I'm getting loads of white screens, whether I'm flicking past other slides or it's tricking me. This is that house. It's nearly finished now. There with. You just seen white screen?
Yes. Yep. We saw the houses that you were talking about before. So you see that one.
Just one. There's lots of blank screens showing up. That's a bit worrying. Bear with me a second. Let me just try that again.
We believe you. The content's there, Richard.
I honestly haven't got loads of blank pages. I might just reopen this fella again. Do apologise. Bear with me. Talk amongst yourselves. Although I did actually only finish the slides about 20 minutes into 20 minutes past 11. Yeah, here we go. Where are we? Ah, there we go. Sorry about that.
It's all right. We can edit this bit out, Richard. Don't worry.
What's that? It's not now not wanting to load it. Help. It's not wanting to share that the PDF screen now.
Or is it not wanting to share the presentation?
It's not wanting to share the
Hi, Richard. Can I
Sorry?
make a suggestion?
Of course. Please.
What if you tried to print the presentation as a PDF and then you shared the PDF?
That is a PDF. That's why it is a PDF.
Oh, it is a PDF. Okay.
Yeah. It's up on. It's showing up on my screen now in Acrobat. It's just when I go to share screen, it's now showing me a blank. Got show all windows. Come
on. What about sharing the document that you made it in?
Yeah. Although that, I'll try that. Although the slides were in a slightly different order. That's. Oh, here we go. Oh, hang on. Hey, is that working now?
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that.
Fantastic.
So anyway, that's that house at the top of the White Cliffs. Almost finished. I won't talk about the layout of it. Anyway, that's So that the truly outstanding or innovative seemed to suggest that there was a choice. And as I said earlier, if one has to reflect the high standards in architecture, and that's indivisible from being truly outstanding, then the term innovative would actually be mute. Interestingly, in the latest version of the policy, rather than, I think the spirit of these projects is that there should be an and, that they're truly outstanding and innovative. That tends to be how we approach this. But the policy itself was instead evolved to keep the word truly outstanding in and drop innovation altogether, which is kind of ironic. But funny enough, we just had a response this morning from a design officer on one of our paragraph 80 schemes. And he has said that our scheme, despite having full support from independent design review panel, jumped through all the hoops. He said there's nothing experimental being done in the scheme. And I'm like, oh my God, another person who's thinking that these schemes have to throw some groundbreaking idea or innovation or piece of technology in the scheme. And as I've said, the evolution of the policy is showing that actually that's not appropriate in the wording of the policy and how it's evolved. Up on the screen now is another one of our paragraph 80 projects. This is in high-wheeled AOMB. And we got consent for this. That we had very strong support from the LPA on this one, local authority, but the committee decided it wasn't anything unusual, so they refused it. So it went to appeal and we won, and now we built it. So this house is set within 40 acres, and our energy strategy for this building, set in 40 acres with lots of woodland that he's managing. This is a tool that we developed that sort of looks at different characteristics, inherent characteristics of various types of clean energy resource. So from wind, hydro, geothermal, biomass, solar, AD. We've also got heat pump technology on there as well now, later ones. And we basically look at what the characteristics of, so in an AOMB, for example, wind technology could be fantastic. We've got lots of open spaces and a lake. We've got good, clear access to wind, but we're in an AOMB. So the visual impact of using wind technology is going to outweigh the positive side of what wind energy could do to help a house. So it scores negative. It's a scoring system that helps show why we pursue one solution over another. And in this case, on that site, we felt that use of biomass and solar was a good solution. Nothing rocket science about burning logs to run a house or putting solar panels on it. But the evolution of the policy was clear in saying that this is an appropriate way of going about serving a house. So in this case, we used a Windhager, or was it a Fallon? I can't remember. A Windhager Durowind log burner with a pellet boiler bolted onto it, so they can have the autonomy of pellet when they want it. Not that these clients actually ever do, other than Christmas. And then day to day, they just load their log chamber up, and they've got a solar kiln, effectively greenhouse area, sort of bolted onto the garage, which they dry wood out and moisture test it, make sure it's below 20% before they put it in the log burner, and they run the house off logs, and that heats up a big heat store, and then runs underfloor heating. There's nothing amazingly rocket science about that, but it does mean that that client did send us a lovely message during the energy over this last winter, saying thank you ever so much for making our house extraordinarily cheap to run, and very efficient, because it's designed to be so. On our projects, we will explain how our house is working. Every house needs power and heat, and then we develop this sort of diagram to explain how those different, what are the input technologies, or what are the input resources coming into a house, and then the next column shows what technologies are harnessing that energy, and then in the middle column which technology we're using to store the energy we harnessed, and then what things are consuming the energy we stored, and then what is being exported or being turned back in, and how do heat technologies overlap with power technologies. This is quite a helpful diagram tool to explain things that could be quite dry and otherwise not very interesting. So this house, it's got a log boiler with a pellet boiler bolted onto it, a 13 kilowatt PV system. We've split the PV system into thirds, putting an inverter on each third, and then we've connected one power wall to one phase, because we've got 3-phase power here. We've connected a power wall and a gateway to one phase. We've got an iPower, or is it an eddy? No, we've got 2 eddy units on the other phases, just taking spare solar and converting that back into the heat store. And then as the client understands how the battery is working for them and looks at different tariffs, they can bolt on another battery onto one of the other phases and keep things balanced that way. But so there's nothing massively unusual, nothing groundbreaking, arguably nothing innovative about what we've just done with that house. But the inspector was quite clear in saying it's at least reflected high standards in architecture, and the performance of the building is higher in its performance than any house that's appeared on or been long or shortlisted for the House of the Year, which I'll get onto in a second, and sort of give it some context as to what reflects the higher standards in architecture. It's got a very technical component to that, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, this piece of policy, paragraph 80, has been designed to be a piece of policy to be made possible, a hurdle, not an insurmountable prison fence. And in our work, we quite often we come across individuals or local authorities who have a perception that paragraph 80 sets such a high bar, one should never pass it. Clearly, there's no point having a policy that no one can reach. So we come up against a situation where it's often said we have the high bar. And people kind of move the high bar of paragraph 80 and what it means around it in different places. And I thought to myself, well, what could we say reflects the highest standards in architecture? What is the high bar? So surely award-winning and national award-winning projects could be said to have met the high bar of quality of design and architecture, high standards in architecture. So we decided in 2021 to just do a bit of digging. Let's find the EPC certificates. Not that EPC is a brilliant tool, but let's find the EPC certificates. It's publicly available for houses that have been long listed for the House of the Year, National RBA House of the Year. So if they've been long listed for the House of the Year, it means they've won a regional RBA award at least, and to be put forward to the national. And we found in 2021 that there was only one A-rated house on the long list. That didn't make it onto the short list. And that seemed quite a surprise to us. So we put a tweet out and it gathered a lot of attention, and the AJ and various magazines picked it up and wrote articles about it. And we were asked again to do the same thing last year. So in 2022 did the same thing, but this time we wrote to all the architects and asked them if they've got more information about post-occupancy monitoring or actual energy performance that might differ from what an EPC says. By all means, send that information to us and we'll publish that. Otherwise, we'll publish what we can find. And once again, there was only one house on the long list that had an A rating, and that didn't make it to the shortlist either this year. Anyway, interesting. So I found this quite interesting because the results have been quite disturbing. We've now extended our research back to 2011. So this is 3 years after the introduction of EPCs. So we give 3 years grace from when EPCs were introduced, even though I was able to get an A rating back in 2009 for my house. I wasn't the only person doing things well, but there were fewer of us. But in our library of houses that have won the Mansa Prize, national or regional RBA awards, I'm quite shocked, to be honest, to see that the 290 odd projects we've got on our list, the average score for houses that have won all these awards is still a C rating, a high C rating, but it's a C rating. And I'm prepared to put my head above the parapet and say, is that good enough in this day and age? And should there not be a higher component of technical relating to something that wins an award? When we did this research in 2021, the chair of the judge, AJ, got some opinion from the chair of the judges that year, Amin Taha, and I don't mind drawing out some of his comments because they're so archaic. I don't mind calling it out because to say such things as it's a little unfair to judge designs conceived more than a decade ago by today's expectations. I think climate change has been around a bit longer than this, but anyway, possibly in 4 or 5 years' time, we'll get closer to a short list of structures that are carbon negative with fractional running costs. How out of date is this guy? Should this guy be chairing a national housing award? And some of the other comments are just crazy, but it should be saying that architects should be the last to point the finger at, and blaming contractors and QSs for increase in energy that goes into buildings and carbon. And Doug will recognise this diagram because he drew it. And many of you here will know that this is, the biggest impact you'll have on energy performance and carbon things is when you are designing the building at location, its orientation and form. And as you go through the design process, the impact of the decisions you might make become smaller and smaller on what the performance of the building will be. So I'm not quite sure where Amintar went to college, but this stuff's pretty fundamental. I think everyone should know this stuff. Another one of Doug's diagrams. So I think this stuff's all quite clear. I just don't think it's right that someone with those views is chairing a national a national award panel. Because for me, that's a pretty out of touch mindset to have. And by comparison, I wanted to make sure my own house was in order. But fortunately, because we have to deliver paragraph 80 houses, they all have to be very good. So every single house that we've designed has achieved an A rating. And our average score, EPC score, is, I'm very proud to say, 102.8. And it's higher than the highest score of any house that's been shortlisted for a national award. This is an extract from all our research. So you can see all the different colours on here, the yellows and reds that appear, some dark greens, not much. That's our list. That's our list on the right there. So putting that into a little scatter graph, we started at 2011 here. So we've got all the houses that got shortlisted and what their EPC score is. And what one would expect to see over more than a decade is an increase in those levels over time. But I'm rather shocked to see that actually there's no change. In fact, there's actually a slight drop over the years. Which I just don't think is good enough, and I'm gonna mention it and talk about it. On the right here is you see this performance gap, if you like, between the average scores of all these shortlisted houses and the average score of our own projects, which do go on an upward trajectory over time as we learn how to do things better. And we will continue to do so. EPCs aren't the greatest tool, but they won't tend to make a bad building look good. What we do and have been doing for the last few years is monitoring our buildings with our clients to go in and actually see how they are performing. We're working with people like Doug and his team and Richard Jack at Build Test Solutions, his smart HTC monitoring that he's come up with through his development work. Really easy, really good way of being able to go to different buildings and measure apples and apples and apples from building to building to building, because we put a monitoring system in our house back in 2009 say we're measuring apples, somebody else was measuring pears in their building and somebody else is measuring oranges in theirs. And it was very difficult, even though people are monitoring stuff, to be able to compare data. User influence, weather, climate, all that sort of data wasn't being able to make things align. Whereas what they've been doing at Build Test Solutions is creating a system that can enable apples and apples and apples from building to building measured at different times and different periods. Richard Jack's also got a very cool thing that he's doing where you connect a FLIR One Pro thermal imaging camera to a phone. There's a clever piece of software that basically enables you to do live measuring of view values. So this is him setting it up in the corner of my house. My tiled arch does have some cold bridging through the side of it where I've got a thermal break in the arch, and I always knew that I'd have a cold bridge where the arch meets the foundations. And then you can see that cold bridge in the U value there. But Would it change? Would it have made me not do this design? No, but I just knew about it and compensated for it elsewhere. That's a very cool thing to do. So this year, with the work we did to engage with the architects that have been longlisted for House of the Year, one of the practices and the client that was very much on board with doing this monitoring and wanting to understand how their building worked and enhance their understanding was the winner. David Cohn Architects and the project architect Jennifer Dine and Edward, the client, have invited us in with Richard Jack to start to do some monitoring. This house actually has achieved a C rating with a score of 73, and the client's, he gets drafts down the middle of his house because he runs this log burner quite a bit, but then you find out he's put air bricks in, and the air tightness rating of 5, which it's not that good, is it? But there's no ducted fresh air supply to the wood burner, and obviously no understanding of how to manage the air quality and the things that the client perceived as how the house would work. He said at the RBA when they did a talk at the RBA, he said, we didn't want to live in a stuffy passive house. Now I know lots of people in the audience here will be going, what? So his perception of what a passive house was not quite right. So we're trying to educate, and part of what we're doing in this work is to try and help raise the standards of design more generally, which is one of the tests of paragraph 80. So here we are actually helping them. When we get this data back, we do analysis of it and comparison data so that clients can understand what it is they bought, how it's working, etc. And then we analyze that against the performance we actually set. And we are seeing a performance gap, but I'm pleased to say that on our buildings, we're seeing performance gaps that are better than the performance that we'd actually stated, which is rather good. And we're going into all our buildings and doing that. And so it's a viewpoint lake. Yeah, so the lake house, the monitoring we did last year was showing it performing 11% better than we expected, which is great. So we're lucky in the sense that because we have to deliver paragraph 80, clients can't argue with the fact we have to deliver a very airtight, very high performance building. So that's what we do. Well, what comes up, going back to innovation and paragraph 80, it comes up a lot that whoever you speak to, this technology that we developed using PVT and Earth Energy Bank is something that we've sort of developed to a point it works really well, but it won't work well everywhere. It won't be the right solution everywhere. Lots of people will talk to me about using heat pumps, air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps. In recent years, we've found it quite interesting looking at things like long wave infrared. We've been using biomass for years. We will never use an oil or a gas boiler, but we're quite interested to understand how one might be able to compare all of these things on any given property. Of course, we know that size and efficiency, the number of kilowatt hours per metre squared per annum, will make a big difference as to what the appropriate solution might be. So we've started to develop a piece of software that enables a lay user or a professional to be able to determine this by putting in certain. So a lay person who doesn't know anything about buildings at all might be able to just click a preset 3-bedroom house, for example, and it will kind of show them typically what a 3-bedroom house energy profile looks like and what an appropriate technology might be to run their house, depending on how efficient it is. So if you've got a really energy hungry house that's quite large, certain technologies aren't going to be appropriate. One was going to be more appropriate than another, but whoever we spoke to, they seem to have a pet technology. And I wasn't seeing so much impartial balancing of understanding of lots of different technologies, because we know that there'll be scales. As if you're on a coast and you have a house that's quite large with quite a high heat demand, your air source heat pump might corrode quicker than if it's inland. So the lifespan of the heat pump will be challenged. So can we model that? Well, yes, we can. And can we look at what the maintenance costs are? Can we look at what the installation costs of different systems might be relative to the size of the building? So we've basically been developing a piece of software that enables all this stuff to happen. This is a crude version of first output. Doug will recognize these because he was with me when we first talked about it at Grand Designs Live last year. And so we basically, Doug, myself, Dan Large, heat pump specialist, and a guy from Windhager was there, and a guy whose interests were in long wave infrared was there. So we all sat together and tried and stress tested this piece of software to kind of show that it was being robust and fair. And there was a couple of outputs that came from that. And as this software develops, you'll be able to test lots more things. But here's an example of a typical 3-bedroom house with a 12,000 kilowatt hour heat demand, with its electricity set at 37p per kilowatt hour, and its heat demand of 12,000 kilowatt hours. Which is one of the examples we had last year. You can see over time on the bottom here, we've got time going out to 50 years. So it's in the vertical axis is cost. So it's cost of putting in different systems. So for example, of this 3-bedroom house, the cheapest system to put in as a central heating system is long wave infrared. But because it's a 12,000 kilowatt hour demand and long wave infrared, you're only getting at best one for one, although there are certain efficiencies about using long wave infrared helpful. Its running cost and the carbon associated with that running cost are higher. I'll get onto carbon in a minute. But what I'd fairly universally heard was that a heat pump would be better, and because you're getting more units of energy per each unit you're spending, and that's fair. But then when the significant replacement things have to happen, is that built into that model? So in this left hand you'll see that the running costs, for example, of a heat pump are on a shallower curve than the long wave infrared, but the little step ups are quite interesting because those are when something significant might need to be changed. I'm also embedding in maintenance costs here and the cost of it installing the distribution technology. So the only technology here that doesn't require a distribution system like underfloor heating or radiators is the long wave infrared, because the thing that emits is the distribution system. So this model was something quite interesting. We actually started doing this with Doug and Jen at Mesh, and we developed it from there. But when we put in, when we look at a passive house with a lower heat demand, the prior, which technology is appropriate changes, especially when you look at different tariff products. So we're on the Tesla energy plan with Octopus, which is sadly soon to be phased out because they're not making enough money out of people like me, which is really annoying because I love it. But our 11p profile, if we were running our house off infrared, it would be by far be the cheapest solution. We've never put gas and oil in because of their carbon footprint, but the profile of which technology might be appropriate it's different between one property and another, depending on its size and how much energy demand is. If you flip that to carbon, here's that same 3-bedroom house looking at its carbon intensity at current grid CO2. So that 277 grams. Well, when I last did this, it's come down as an average. Now it might have done in the last few months, but if 277 grams is an average kilowatt CO2 per kilowatt hour, the CO2 footprint of the infrared, of the electricity required for the infrared, knocks out infrared from a CO2, and all of a sudden, for a 3-bedroom house with 12,000 kilowatt hours, longer term, PV, PVT, even biomass actually come out higher or lower than a ground source or air source heat pump at 277 grams. But of course, the grid's being decarbonised. If we look at electricity from the grid at 100 grams, then the picture changes. Gas and oil stay up high, but the carbon footprint of that electricity to run the long wave infrared comes down, and air source and ground source become less carbon intensive than the biomass. So this tool is something we're developing to help us make informed decisions. Oh, that's the last slide. Oh, wow. So
You sound surprised,
I've gone through
Richard.
that quicker than I thought I was going to.
That was good timing. That was good timing because it allows some time for questions.
It does.
We've got thanks for that, by the way. We've got a couple of questions. Anybody who's been thinking about some questions, do get smashing away on the comments section just to get those in. I'm sure you're happy, Richard, for everybody to throw whatever questions they deem appropriate at you.
I see Rebecca asked the question that I then covered. She asked the question at 12:20 and I then covered it.
There you go. Yeah. So let's talk about the one from Stephen then. So Stephen was asking, have you ever used earth tubes on any of your projects? And if so, were they successful?
Preheating MVHR incoming air, or
I think that's what Stephen means. Is that what you mean, Stephen? Kind of just these long tubes that you tend to get on the kind of the continent where you draw air in, it cools it down or warms it up.
I actually the day before I poured the slab for my own house, I was going to be doing that, and I just, because it was that hadn't been done and it was difficult enough finding an MVHR unit at that time. I bottled out because I'd read something that talked about, well, if you're bringing air, fresh air in past a tube that's got kind of heat round it, there was a possibility of bacterial growth on the inside of the pipe. And I got the jitters and I bottled out.
Right.
So
that's a new one on me.
Now I know it was not something I should have been so concerned about. Okay. I should have done it. And funny, we haven't done it on another project. But what we always do, as Richard Porteous will attest to, is we're very careful about where we put the incoming ducts, and ensure that they don't suffer problems that we've seen on other systems. So we always bring the fresh air in from the north side, the coolest place we can, and try and mitigate, sort of temper this, certainly in summer situations, what that air coming in is. But absolutely, when it comes to no, so the answer is no, I haven't. But what I do like to advocate to our clients is, because we like our buildings to be as hygroscopic as they can be, so that the building materials themselves, so the building's able to absorb and release moisture to regulate relative humidity itself, rather than needing it to be done mechanically. So that works well on the way we build buildings, because the materials we use are naturally hygroscopic. But that's important because I turned my MVHR system off in probably March, April, later this month. We had the windows open last night, but we'll turn the MVHR off. Richard's new MVHR system that he put in product. Because my system was 14 years old and had no maintenance at all in 14 years, much to Richard's horror. So we've now replaced the unit. But anyway, we turn ours off in April and turn it back on again in late September, October, because we open windows. We just use the house like a kind of normal house. So we have a window at the top of the house that we put on tilt. So we let the house basically purge vent at night, and ours is a high mass thermal, a high thermal mass passive house. So we're able to absorb an awful lot of solar gain in the summer to keep the air temperature down, and then it just purges at night. So that's how we do it in our house, and we can regulate relative humidity at the same time, and we don't have any problem with CO2 levels because we've got windows open everywhere. That's what we do. We like advocating that to our clients, but it does require a little bit of knowledge about how to use the building. So when my brother and sister-in-law came and stayed in our house last summer while we were away, they said, "Oh, it's getting a bit warm inside." And I said to them, "Have you left the top window open?" And they said, "Oh, yes." And then I saw a photograph of them in the garden. They were just standing next to each other in the back of the garden. I could see the window was shut. And I said, "Well, that's why it's because it's not able to cool down again at night." So it's a simple thing. If you don't do it, the house will feel as though it's not working properly. It's a little bit of education. And often another one that a lot of clients come to us with this. I always have my bedroom window open, and you have to kind of educate. You won't need to. Oh, you better get stuff in. You won't have that problem. And they say, no, but I'll have it open anyway. Or bathroom windows. I need to have an openable window because it will get smelly in the bathroom. And so you have to kind of educate. educate people. You won't feel like that because the CO2 levels won't make you feel drowsy, and the relative humidity will just feel nice, and the air will just smell nice. It will just smell normal. So when they get used to being in these environments, they kind of go, oh, I get it now, and take a little bit of education. Sorry.
Great. A couple of other ones there that have come up just whilst we've been speaking there. So Lyra is asking, would you say that Para 80 centres a lot on the technology in regards to innovation?
I think it depends who you're speaking to, as in which local. It varies a lot from local authority to local authority, if I'm honest. Some local authorities treat paragraph 80 as thou shalt not pass, and they've got their fingers in their ears, don't really want to engage in it as a policy. I was at a scheme yesterday with a planning officer and a design conservation officer, and I said to them, I assume you'll want this scheme to go to independent design review, and they said, no, we don't use independent design review panels, don't feel the need for it. Quite happy, we can see the quality of design. And I went, oh wow, okay, that's like, so they had confidence in themselves to make decisions.
Yeah,
I tend to find that planners are quite timid, so they want the reassurance that the scheme's been independently verified, and review panels are often part of that.
And that links to a question that David's asked here. He said, is the use of a regional design panel useful in putting an irrefutable case to planning officers?
Interesting to use the word regional design panel. We have sometimes a local authority will say, we want you to use our panel. Some local authorities have set up their own panels, and we've found, we've presented about 40 of our paragraph 80 schemes to something like a dozen different design review panels across the country, and we have found design review panels are quite varied in how they set themselves up, but fortunately there are some national guidelines about how to set up a design review panel. So what we now do is, because some local authorities literally say you must go and see this particular panel, and in which case we go, okay, let's not argue with them, we'll go and see that panel. But then when you go and see that panel and it's not a multidisciplinary panel, or they're not very experienced at dealing with paragraph 80 schemes, that can be quite a struggle. So sometimes we tender the provision of design review because it's not a cheap process. So sometimes we will go out to 3 different design review panels and get a quote from each of them and let the client choose on cost, or so it varies, but some local authorities think that going to their local panel is somehow going to give them superpowers, whereas actually it can be quite, if they're narrow, they might not actually have many experiences of dealing with these types of applications, or they might like this letter we've had back from a design officer this morning. He said, there's nothing experimental going on in it, and you kind of go, oh, let's educate you about the policy. So we're quite careful about which panel we go to, but we're very keen to make sure they're multidisciplinary, that they should have at least 4 to 6 people on them, with 2 or 3 architects. You want landscape discipline because you're dealing with houses in the countryside. There is one panel, I won't name it, who don't and never put landscape architects on these types of panels, which is just ludicrous. Or panels where there's one architect, and that's really bad because it's just the opinion of one person, so it's quite difficult. So they do need to be multidisciplinary. That's what it says in the national guidance. And also, if you've been to a panel, the council and the national policy says that they should be giving that, what the design review panel say, great weight, significant weight. What they can't do is say, yeah, but you didn't go to our panel, so we can ignore it. And we've got appeal decisions that have reinforced that now, which is good to know as well. But if you've been to one panel and not another panel, you can't be and shouldn't be penalised for it. And there are decisions that can be held up to sort of say that you can't do that. So yeah, I hope that's the question. Okay,
no, that's cool. Okay, we've only got a few minutes, so I'll ask one more question from Alex actually, and this is probably an interesting one. You should have a good response to this. Are your houses normally passive house certified, or do you use PHPP in modelling them? If not passive house, what's your reason kind of not to? That's what Alex.
Very good question, Alex. Bizarrely, we have, of all the clients that have come to us over 15 years, not one of them, actually, there's one, it was on West Wittering Beach and it wasn't a paragraph 80, but only one client in 15 years has come along saying, I want a certified passive house. They all want their house to be efficient and have low running costs, things like that. So their motive is to actually have high efficiency and low running costs. They're not, their obsession isn't to have the certificate piece of paper. What we have done, and my house wasn't modelled on PHPP. When we finished it, the Passive House Institute were asked, so can we run it? And then I said, yeah, here's all the drawings, here's all the data, and it passed. And I'm pleased to say, obviously, we learned a lot about how to build a passive house at that point. But trying to model our house is quite tricky, and we've never used PHPP on any of our buildings, but our buildings perform phenomenally well. Our clients love living in them, and we can focus on giving a house to a client that's unique for them and their site and setting. We don't run things through PHPP, as you help us with modeling our buildings. With the various people we use to model various things. We've learned a lot. We get lots of data. We kind of have a good feel for that. It's not rocket science fundamentally.
So you're essentially saying there's not the client demand, and you believe that you can get squeeze 99% of the performance out of the building without getting a rubber stamp or a badge on the outside of the house.
But Passive House isn't looking at all types of criteria. How's Passive House looking at hygroscopicity? Peculiarity in structures, embodied energy. The techniques we're using. I mean, we've adapted the way we build our buildings from doing embodied energy analysis on my house. Somebody at Cambridge University's engineering department did a study of my house. They even had we had the site diary who knew what cars people drove to work, where they lived, what car they were driving, and did an energy footprint of people erecting my house, how much driving carbon went in to put the timber frame up. And we learned from that was quite a high component of carbon. So we changed the way we engineer the buildings to make it so we do a lot more engineering in the computer, and then things come along cut and labeled. And we even order things on the trucks in a certain way so they can come and go up more obviously, rather than packing a truck to be super efficient. Sometimes it's better to pack the truck less efficiently but have stuff come so it can just be taken apart and all put together, rather than be packed efficiently and then rummaging around stuff, and it takes 3 times as long to find the bits to put the frame together. It's like but it only came on 2 trucks rather than 3 or 4. It's like, well, actually, but it took next 3 or 4 days, so it's better to do it alone. It's good. It's just little bits of stuff that we kind of pick up along the way, and then it becomes embedded in the way we do things, and then you forget you ever did it any different.
Thank you, Richard. Sadly, we are out of time. That's your hour up. Great. It's always great hearing about some of the projects that you're doing, and hopefully, regardless of what people think about whether architects should be responsible for EPC ratings or not, it's really great. It's great. It's just great food for thought, and a lot of this is just about sharing thoughts and getting people and professionals thinking about what they're doing. And that's great. So again, thank you.
If anyone's got any other questions or wants to follow up on any of these things, do get in touch.
Yeah, great. Thank you, everybody. See you for another chat next week on Meshwork. Cheers. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.